Business Review, a daily program that delves into the latest and most significant economic stories. From stock markets to currency news, Business Review covers the most up-to-date stories in the global financial world.
Venezuelans struggling to cope with chronic fuel shortages are jury-rigging vehicles to run on cooking gas cylinders, a practical industrial safety experts described as dangerous and has led to at least one explosion. Venezuela, an OPEC member that sits at the top of the world's largest crude reserves, is suffering the worst gasoline shortages in modern history due to a near-complete collapse of its refineries combined with U.S. sanctions that make it difficult to import fuel. Mechanics and in some cases drivers themselves revamp vehicle fuel systems with a propane cylinder of the sort used for kitchen stoves to avoid service station lines that sometimes leave people waiting for days to buy gasoline. Senan Aguirre said a car he cannot make his ends meet. He worries more about having to pay off the police not to impound his car because the arrangement is illegal. Meanwhile, Alfredo Gonzalez used basic equipment, including kitchen faucets, to convert a pickup truck to run on cooking gas so he could continue providing public transportation, but he spends most of his time ducking the law. The situation is a stark contrast to Venezuela's oil boom era when fuel was abundant and heavily subsidized. Fuel officially remains nearly free for those who can wait in lines or have connections, but gasoline now fetches $3 a liter on the black market.
Unions and social organizations took to the streets and squares in various parts of Ecuador to reject economic measures imposed by President Lenin Moreno in the face of a strong liquidity crisis in the dollarized economy amid the coronavirus pandemic. The collapse of world oil prices and the effects of the pandemic have reduced state revenues by some $8 billion, putting pressure on the government to cut public spending, which includes a reduction in the working day and the closure of several public entities. The measures led unions and social organizations to march, carrying protests with anti-government slogans through the streets of the center of the capital, Quito, where there is a strict lockdown due to the increasing number of infections and deaths from the coronavirus. Moreno will also put into effect reforms to modify the conditions of private sector labor contracts, and from June, assist to set fuel prices in an attempt to reduce state subsidies. In the historic center of Quito, the government palace was heavily guarded by police and surrounded by metal fencing where protesters burned tires. Interior Ministry Maria Paula Romo told reporters that a policeman was injured in the protest that included, according to her calculations, some 4,000 people across the country, despite restrictions in force for the past 70 days to halt the spread of the coronavirus. Ecuador has registered some 37,355 infections and 3,203 deaths from coronavirus, but authorities have said figures could be much higher due to underreporting.
What's the next best thing to sitting in a darkened movie theater? A drive-in cinema in the Spanish capital launched its post-lockdown summer season with a blast of escapism in the form of the 1978 musical Grease. Conventional theaters and most other forms of indoor entertainment remain closed as Spain, one of the world's hardest hit countries, gradually lifts coronavirus restrictions. But the Autoscene Race drive-in, where moviegoers stay safely in their cars, has got the green light to reopen, but with a reduced capacity of 100 cars and social distancing measures. Drive-in movie theaters are seeing a revival in other parts of the world as leisure industry figures out how to deal with the constraints of the pandemic, popping up, for example, in Lithuania, Dubai, the United States, and Cannes in France. At Madrid's Autoscene, ushers in high-visibility jackets and face protectors guided cars to neatly marked out spaces, ensuring safe distancing. As the sun set over the city, John Travolta, and Olivia Newton-John danced once again across the big screen with 250s cars on displays beneath it, transporting spectators back to the American high school life of that period, far away from concerns of the pandemic.
Dozens of hospital workers banged pans and chanted in front of a Paris hospital to demand better working conditions as France prepares to further ease its coronavirus lockdown. Defying a government ban on public gatherings of more than 10 people, health workers gathered in front of Roper Debris Hospital, saying that although they were able to save lives during the outbreak, the difficulties that have long haunted hospitals persisted. Pediatrician Stefan Dogger said as admission for cases of coronavirus, which has so far killed more than 28,000 nationwide, went down, patients who are sick with other illnesses are bound to return to hospital units, which make the situation even harder. Dogger said he demands the government increase health workers' salaries and stop cutting hospital beds, adding that a reform of the hospital system is needed. French health workers have been taking to streets and striking in past months to call on President Emmanuel Macron to improve working conditions, which include thinning staff and less beds due to their decrease in funding, which they say has led to deteriorated patient care. France will absorb 10 billion euros of public hospital debt the government announced in November 2019, part of emergency measures aimed at ending the months of street protests by fed-up doctors and nurses.
The South Korean prosecutors questioned Samsung heir J.Y. Lee over a controversial deal that they say may have helped advance his succession plans. The deal involves alleged accounting fraud as well as widely criticized merger of two Samsung affiliates. The 2015 merger between Samsung C&T and Cheil Industries, where Lee is a top shareholder, cemented Lee's control over South Korea's top conglomerate, and prosecutors have been investigating suspected account fraud at Cheil-owned Samsung Biologics after the country's financial watchdog complained the firm's value had been inflated by over $3 billion. A spokesman for Samsung Electronics, where Lee serves as vice chairman, declined to comment. The questioning brings fresh legal trouble for Lee. He faces separate succession-related charges of bribery, which involved former South Korean President Park Geun-hye. Lee was released from a year-long detention over the bribery case back in 2018, and earlier this month, he made a rare apology about the bribery scandal. He pledged he would not hand the company founded by his grandfather over to his children.
German automaker Volkswagen has resumed operations in Argentina following a pause in production because of the coronavirus. Operations at this plant resumed on May 18th with new measures on social distancing in place and a requirement that employees wear face masks and visors. Upon its reopening, Volkswagen announced that the Pacheco plant will produce the Nimbus vehicle, a new model aimed at the Latin American market and which uses parts secured from Argentina. According to Volkswagen, the Pacheco plant represents a $650 million investment in Argentina. With the South American nation in the throes of recession, Industry Minister Ariel Schell said that Buenos Aires was looking at attracting more international investment and manufacturing into the country with a series of incentives. The Pacheco plant has a workforce of about 3,700 and exports its vehicles to some 35 countries. A caravan of cars led by the animal rights group PETA protested outside the meat packing plant farmer John Invernon. The plant has been at the center of an outbreak of the coronavirus, with over 150 people testing positive, despite installing numerous protective protocols, including plexiglass and temperature testing to shield their workers. The numbers continue to rise. John Grant, president of UFCW 777, the union which oversees the workers, said he had to call the families of 4 of our members who died. There are other members that are in incubation. There are others that have lost the ability to walk. The problem as they live in neighborhoods, they live with family, they support family, and the danger is bringing these infections home and infecting their loved ones. In fact, when they talk to the members, their concern is almost greater for their family than it is for themselves. Grant is calling for the plant to be shut down because of the outbreak, but it is still operational. He said the outbreak is over 10% of the workforce and it's dangerous, and the problem with this is that it's invisible and deadly. And so what you do is when a shark in the water, you pull everyone out of the water and you make an assessment of what is going on. The protest was organized by animal rights organization PETA, and members honked their horns and stuck signs on their cars as they drove past the plant. They weren't just protesting for the animals, but for the workers as well.
This has been Business Review, your daily source for the most critical stories in the financial world. Tune in next time for the latest financial news impacting the world economy.